Hello and welcome to video 4 in this series on teaching historical concepts. If you haven't watched video 1 and 2 on historical inquiry and evidence, please watch them before, as this one directly builds on them. From this point on, there is no set order to view them in, so watch those relevant to what you are teaching. Today the focus is on cause and consequence. We'll be focusing on the same 3 questions as before, with the aim of having a deeper understanding of this concept and thinking about the role it plays in the primary history classroom. This video series acts as an introduction to a much deeper conversation. What is a second order concept? The first thing we do when teaching history is study the relevant source material to gain the knowledge relevant to the inquiry question at hand. The first order concepts, therefore, are those related to knowledge such as trade, monarchy, etc. Once we've gained that knowledge, we use concepts such as cause and consequence to interpret the relevant knowledge as a historian might. They're the second thing we do after gaining that knowledge. So before we start, inquiry questions are key to provide clarity of purpose. Each of these overall inquiry questions is broken into sub-questions to lead either an individual lesson or a couple of lessons. The core knowledge must be defined in advance of the lesson so the end point is clear and emphasis can be given. And sources of evidence are studied to locate the evidence that is then interpreted. Where could it feature in a curriculum? The content on the screen is a blend of statutory units alongside others which are frequently taught. They may be the focus for an entire unit or a smaller sub-inquiry. However it is embedded, children must have the necessary knowledge at hand to drive their conclusions, answers, interpretations, etc. History has the word story in it for a reason. When we're studying causes and consequences, it's important to think about which aspects of the particular narrative at hand are being focused on. This makes the framing for the narrative arc a better prospect. In many cases, the decisions of individuals or characters are the causes of events or turning points, so their actions are important to study in depth. The teacher needs to clarify the relevant background in each lesson, as cause and consequence are really complex and often multifaceted, even when a single event is the focus of the inquiry. What is cause and consequence? Causes are focused on explaining why things happened in the past. Consequences are what happened as a result of what happened. Whilst listed here as one concept, they may be studied separately. More examples in just a moment. The words may imply singular cause and consequence, but history is much more complex than that. More often than not, there are several. What role does it play in lessons? To fully understand the varied causes and consequences of an event, decisions, etc. in history, it's important children have sufficient knowledge to both understand the contributing factors and the event itself. Therefore, the interpretation element of the inquiry will come towards the end of a lesson or series of lessons. The overall inquiry question identifies cause, consequence as key, and the sub-inquiries may focus attention on different aspects which were a partial cause or partial consequence. These are then collated at the end of the study. What could it look like in early years? The earliest exposures to history in school will arrive in early years as part of understanding the world. These are often not based around history, but they lay an important foundation that decisions and actions have consequences. The example on screen is scientific, but it could link to fictional stories as learning so often does. By adding sunlight and water to a seed in a pot, the plant can start to grow. Additional complexity in Key Stage 1. Formal history begins in Key Stage 1, therefore the learning will be historically focused from this point onwards. It's important that children understand that they will encounter multiple causes or consequences. In this example, causes of the Great Fire of London could be classified into short-term and long-term. The same could be true of consequences of the fire. We may also ask children to think about the range of causes that played a role within the fire starting. It is not a case of saying the most important cause because they overlap. This needs to be actively taught. If teaching the first flight, an emphasis on causes would be harder to teach because it occurs because of technological developments and refinements by the Wright brothers. Not all events naturally tie with causation or consequence. Additional complexity in Key Stage 2. The breadth and nature of the content shifts dramatically, and therefore complexity occurs through the content. The graphic organiser, the flow diagram in this case, needs to facilitate the narrative being taught. Causes of the Second World War. Whilst the graphic organiser looks as though it includes the same scope, this is not the case. For this example, based around Upper Key Stage 2, understanding the links of these branches of history is important as it emphasises how multifaceted historical narratives are. These branches would be woven through subsequent lessons to add depth and in an attempt to understand them fully. Moving on to consequences, ensure children understand that consequences are an outcome of an event. When used in common parlance, the use of the word "there will be consequences" is likely to incur a negative connotation. In history, it is merely an outcome. So for the Great Fire of London, we may classify it in terms of short-term and long-term consequences. Understanding the difference between change and consequence is important. So for consequences, we may choose to use the phrase "because of an event," indicating that this outcome is a direct result of the event in question. For the outbreak of war example, we may look at social consequences, economic consequences and political consequences in an attempt to give a wider understanding to this complex and multifaceted narrative. Consequence ripples can be used to look at how consequences develop over time, or how they may vary from local to the international picture. Whichever graphic organiser is used, it's important that children are instructed on what the organiser does and how it helps organise the relevant knowledge. Then, progression can occur by repeated meaningful examples where scaffolds develop and are progressively withdrawn as appropriate. Linking across the curriculum. The first time children encounter this particular concept, it's important it is explicitly instructed, and the way in which it plays a role in the teaching and learning is carefully scaffolded. This will support the children in understanding both what the concept means and how it plays a role in the way we'll interpret our findings. When it's encountered again, ensure the children are aware they have encountered this before in detail the context, and instruct them on the new context to which it sits. This time we will still scaffold carefully and ensure the children have the opportunity for some guided practice in order to look at how the concept looks in this example, because the nuance may very likely be different. As they become more proficient, we'll start to think about the use of retrieval of procedures for them to understand, oh yes, I remember what this means, I've encountered it before, and then discuss the new context to think about how it might look for this particular example. A quick summary. By using those historically valid and focused inquiry questions, it allows teachers to emphasise which part of this particular story matters in inverted commas. This is why prescribing the second order content is really key. Always ensure that the children understand that they're encountering a particular episode of history, be that a singular event or a wider period of time, and that we are choosing to focus our attention on some parts of that. The children must encounter the core knowledge sitting within that background narrative. As the teaching process continues, ensure that continuous and central relationship between the inquiry question or questions and the knowledge is clear. and ensure that the teacher's role is always to narrate the knowledge to direct the children towards the endpoint which the curriculum is specifying. What next? Think carefully about which concepts we are choosing to stress in overall inquiry, questions and sub-questions. Hopefully you found this video. Please do give it a like, comment, share with your colleagues, and a subscribe is always much appreciated. Thanks very much. Bye.